What's up, everybody? Welcome to the second edition of Life After Fusion. Today, I'm here with an Ironman in training, Mr. Davin Michaels. Davin, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm 42. I'm an elementary school teacher here in Sacramento. I've been teaching for 15 years now. It's all been fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. I've been doing triathlons since about 2014. My first one was actually done 5 days prior. I actually tore a ligament in my ankle, but it was a sprint. So yeah, I know, it was crazy. I still went through with it. It was super horrible. The swim was horrible. The bike was tough, but I finished, and I think because it went so horribly, I had to do another one and then do another one. Um, I've done Olympic distances. I've done 70.3s. I've done a full Ironman. I've done trail runs. I have a marathon in a couple weeks. Um, and then, of course, I had my back injury back in 2018, August of.
So
So
that's crazy.
that's.
It's amazing that you're able to do that. I just wanted to throw up the quick pictures of your back surgery so the people who are watching and not just listening can just get a feel for where your injury is. And it's at L1, and you're fused from T12 to L4. Is that correct?
No, T12 to L2.
T12 to L2. That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
It goes backwards. So that's crazy. So you're only 14 months out, and you're already back pretty heavily into training.
Yeah, I did the 31 kilometer run, which is 19.1 miles, trail run back in March. And then in April, my wife and I did a 25-mile endurance run with about 5,000 to 6,000 feet of climbing.
Oh, that's crazy. So talk about what led to you having to have the back surgery, the fusion.
I was actually going to train, just do about a mile and a half in the pool. A car pulled a U-turn in front of me. I clipped the front end of it and then veered off, and I hit a utility pole going about 45 miles an hour. Straight on. I should have actually sent you the pictures of the car. It was pretty banged up. Oh, you have it. All right, perfect. Yeah, and so from there, I don't think this had anything to do with it, but it was a hot mess inside that car. I opened the door. I knew where I was. I never lost consciousness, thank God. I actually got out of the car, and someone had pulled right behind me. She was actually a trauma nurse. She's like, no, stay. I'm like, I've got to get out of the car. She helped me, and there was like a kind of a grassy knoll. So I laid down. She went over all the things. She touched my toes, my fingers, my knee. I felt everything. She started asking me all these questions. I knew all the answers. From there, I went to the hospital and had some interesting days until they decided to do surgery on me.
So if you can, talk about when the doctor came in and said, hey, your back is broken, because, I mean, you said, were you able to walk when you got out of the car?
Yes and no. I walked, but I was basically leaning against my car. And then that's when I don't know her name. We'll call her my guardian angel, because I don't know what would have happened to me if she wasn't there. Helped guide me and kind of like, I can't believe you got out of the car. What are you thinking? But I'm already out of the car, so you might as well help me to get to the little hill. Yeah, I never like felt numbness in my feet or legs. My fingers were fine, no tingling. The doctor just came in and basically said they wouldn't let me move. Once I got basically, once the paramedics arrived and I got put on a board, I didn't move until after my surgery. I mean, I was flat on my back for 2 days roughly until I went into surgery.
And we were talking before this, and Davin was telling me that day he had trained 65 days in a row because he's a very serious triathlete. So you went from training 65 days in a row to being strapped to a hospital bed and just laying there with your thoughts. That's a pretty bad break.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, and that's the thing. One of the things that went through my mind is what's next? I mean, it really is. It's how bad is the break? It took him about 12 hours to figure out what was really wrong with me. I don't even honestly know how many scans I went through. There was some internal bleeding. Not a lot. It went away. So they don't know exactly what it was. It could have been because I did have a cracked sternum. It could have been something from the cracked sternum, but they did see blood in there and the blood went away. So they theorized that it was actually from the cracked sternum more than anything, more than an internal organ or something. But yeah, you're sitting there with your thoughts, and I honestly didn't know what the next stage of my life was going to be. Honestly, it was pretty intense for a
I
couple of
understand.
days.
Yeah, it's very nerve-wracking because you don't know what to expect. So you lay there for 2 days, and then they came in for the surgery. I know you have 3 sets of screws. I'll pull the pictures back up, but it's a 2-level fusion. Did they use stem cells? Obviously, they went in from the back. Did they use stem cells? Did they cut any bone out of your hip or anything to help with the graft for the fusion?
You know, I'm thinking they used stem cells. I don't think they didn't cut any bone out of my body. No, they definitely didn't use any bone. I think no, they used cadaver. They used cadaver. I do remember the cadaver now. So I have cadaver parts in me now, some to help it. There was no infection. So yeah, I'm pretty sure they used cadaver.
So in the previous podcast we did with Maurice, who's an avid powerlifter, he
Mhm.
also got cadaver bone. He says now he feels like a different person. Do you feel like a different person?
No. No,
No.
I don't even notice it. I mean, no, I don't even I actually forgot about the cadaver until I remember something I read. And then you mentioned the stem cells and you mentioned it. Totally forgot about it.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
they actually took bone from my hip and then mixed
okay.
it with a cadaver bone to help it heal faster.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I think I hurt just as much from that as I did from the spinal fusion.
Yeah, taking something from your hip does not sound like it feels good.
It was not good. So after surgery was over, how long were you in the hospital? Because with a traumatic injury like that, they probably wanted to monitor you a
You
lot
know,
longer.
okay, so let me think. The surgery is on the 30th. I think I went home on the third day.
Okay. That's not far.
If the
Did you have a
biggest
pain pump?
Oh, no. The
No. Okay.
biggest thing they wanted me to do is obviously use the restroom on my own, but they brought in a physical therapist and he had to okay it. So he had me get out of the bed, and it really came down to what my ability was. And he had me, the first time he met with me, I walked up and down stairs. I mean, of course, I had to hold the handrail. He wanted to monitor that I could get in and out of bed okay. He wanted to monitor that I could get in and out of a chair, do all of those things. And once I got cleared from him, it was just a matter of making sure I was eating, drinking, and going to the bath and having regular bathroom issue. Not issues, but rather going to the bathroom regularly. So I think yeah, third day it was good.
So I just want to address this. Thanks, James, for watching. And James says, I don't know how you can do what you're doing because I've had 2 lower back surgeries and a neck fusion, and I am in misery, my friend. I hate that that's happened to you. And I addressed this in the last podcast, and I do want to address it this time too.
Yeah.
Not everyone's spinal fusion is the same. Experiences are different. The situations that lead to you having to have the spinal fusion is probably the biggest factor in how well you recover. And then also your level of physical fitness is probably a big factor in how you recover too. Because Gavin, you had it at 41.
Yeah, I was 41 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I weigh only 155 pounds. My not to brag or anything, but my body fat's in the low teens.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it too. The
Yeah.
more weight you put on your spine, there's more stress there. So especially like the first time you're getting out of bed, the first time you're walking,
Mm-hmm.
all of that is going to be a lot more difficult. So somebody like Gavin, who was a little bit older, and generally older people have a harder time making the fusion and healing, but because we're so in shape, you probably healed a lot better.
Yeah, it came down to, again, the physical therapist even said, because I was continuing to stay in shape I was in fantastic shape going in. That the traumatic experience, it didn't damage any of the tissues other than right on the spinal cord. Had those been damaged with that fracture vertebrae, they actually said it would have healed itself. But because the ligaments or tendons, I guess, I'm not exactly sure what it was, around the spinal cord were flayed, were damaged, were beyond repair. That's why they had to go in. When they did one of my scans, my back was already starting to basically go the wrong way, bend.
Yeah,
And
and
it
that
wasn't
will
good.
happen. Yeah, the only way, and the reason for anyone who doesn't know you have to have a fusion is because you can't immobilize your back, even with a brace. You just can't do it unless you physically screw those bones together and hold them with some metal. So you said it after 3 days, you had physical therapy come in, you go home. So how long were you in pain? What kind of medication were you on, and how long were you in physical therapy?
It's okay. So the medication they sent me home was with oxycodone, which was fine. But it wasn't. I wasn't in the. So I don't want to brag. I didn't have a lot of pain. It wasn't from the surgery. I had my pain was nerves. And as we discussed when we were talking, it's those surface nerves in the lower back that really still agitate me. I wanted to start physical therapy first because I was feeling the muscles in my back really, really tighten up. And the doctor's like, no, no physical therapy until like week whatever. And I said, no, no, I don't want to go in for the physical part, the exercise. I want to go in for that to get those muscles loosened up. So we authorized physical therapy at about, I want to say, I don't know if I told you 5 or 6 weeks. And it wasn't to exercise it. It wasn't to do anything strenuous. It was to get the physical therapist to get on with the pads, the electric,
The TENS unit.
yeah, to loosen up those muscles so I didn't start to get tight. That was the biggest my biggest concern is those back muscles just tightening up and hurting. Because I mean, honestly, I couldn't do much. I was laying around a lot. So I got physical therapy started. Um, I'm no longer on any pain medication. I take gabapentin still because when I train long, train hard, those muscles in my lower back flare up. They do not like me, and that's the only thing. The oxycodone was just making me loopy. I didn't, and I know that is it an opioid medication?
It is. What is gabapentin? I'm not actually familiar with that.
So gabapentin was originally designed for seizures, and they found that it actually helped with people that have a lot of nerve issues. It actually settles the nerves down, and it basically gets you back to normal. A lot of people take it for their sciatica, and they've also discovered it's an anti-anxiety medication. So when I take it, I don't care anymore either.
Is that over the counter or a prescription?
No, no, no. It's a prescription. It's a
Okay.
prescription. So I
Well, that is
take
interesting.
my doctor, but basically said I could take 300 milligrams 3 times a day. So she gave me 100 milligram pills. I'd only take maybe 400 to 500 a day max. And those are days that I train if I do a 15-mile run or if I'm on the bike for a couple hours.
Have you found that you have to like cycle that to prevent yourself from building up a tolerance, or just
Yeah, yeah. So what I'll do is I'll take 100 with breakfast, and then typically 100 with lunch, and then on a normal training day, like maybe 100 to 200 before bed.
so you did
And
hit on something about your physical therapy. You said you just wanted to go into physical therapy to start moving, and that is a big point to anybody who has had a fusion and is trying to get back into things. When you have a spinal fusion, you have to be still to get the fusion to take and grow. Those first 4 to 6 weeks are probably the most crucial. But during those times, you can't bend, lift, or twist, and part of that is stretching. So as you lay there, your muscles get so tight, um, and that can be one of the factors that make your fusion take so long to heal. Is that if you start getting back into physical activity, but you're not stretching, and your hamstrings are really tight or your lower rectors are really tight and they pull on that fusion, it's going to make you feel worse. So you got to get everything loosened back up before you start getting into the lifting or the running.
yeah, and again, that's what I was trying to. It took me a week to convince the doctor that's all I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was get the muscles loosened up because I was honestly starting to feel it and it was bothering me. That was my
So
biggest pain in the butt right there, getting those muscles loosened.
yeah, and that was a smart move by you. So talk about when you got finished with therapy and when you could start training for the triathlon events.
So about, I think right after I started, actually before I went to the physical therapist, I got back on my training bike. So I wasn't actually riding my bike outside. I set up on a trainer, but it's my bike that I would use for a triathlon. And I literally I would sit upright to pedal my legs. There was no bending over. I didn't get down in arrow position. I didn't even really hold on to the handlebars because I'm not moving. And then the physical therapist allowed me to go swimming at about 8 weeks. But when I went swimming, I had a pool belt that's actually designed that you keeps you upright and that you actually use to like you simulate running. But it's also designed basically to keep my hips up. So it took all the stress off the lower back. And all I would do at the first couple of times I went in, I just did one lap and I rested. I rested about the same amount of time that it took me to swim the lap. And then I swim back and I did that. I would probably say the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of swimming, I would just literally do a lap in the pool, go back. And so the first time I went swimming was 40 laps, which comes out to about 1,000 meters. It took me, I was in the pool for an hour, but it felt good. I mean, it was a long, tedious swim, but it felt good, helped loosen it up. Then I started running on a treadmill called the Ultra G, which is you get into a big bubble and then it fills up with air and it goes back and forth based on how much weight you want to take off. And I think he had me do that for a couple of times. By 13 weeks, I was feeling good. I did a 5K here in Sacramento before the CIM. They have like a promotional 5K that a lot of people double up on. I think I did 30 minutes, 32 minutes, something like that. But I didn't really have any pain still. The physical therapist was not even perturbed. He knew what I was going to do. He wasn't surprised that I was already out running. He said everything looked good. He couldn't, he had no excuse to not allow me to do it. If that
Yeah,
makes
and one of the things that you mentioned, your first time on a bike, your first time swimming, and your first time running, you were in a controlled
Yeah,
environment. So you weren't out riding on the street where there's potential to fall and then screw up your
yeah,
fusion. And then swimming is good for everybody. Yeah, I think anyone who's had a fusion should get in the pool. And then running on that treadmill sounds like it was really cool. I wish I had that event. So I feel like there is a stigma though that when you have a back injury, that you should stay away from lifting weights. And that's one of the things that I ran into when I started training for lifting. But one of the things about lifting weights is it's very static and you can start out as light as you want. If my
oh
first
yeah,
videos, I started out like with a negative deadlift. The bands were helping me come back up because I physically couldn't do that on my own. And then with weights, you can also drop it whenever you want. I did a sprint triathlon 2 years after fusion, just to say that I did it. I competed in the Clydesdale division, if you know what that is.
yeah,
And to me, training for running was harder than lifting weights because when you're outside, when you're outdoors, the road is not perfectly flat every time. You may
hmm
step into a hole on one thing and that kind of jars you a certain way where it's different than lifting weights because it's the same movement every time. And as long as your form is good, you'll be okay. Now, you're a running coach.
hmm
I was just under the impression that you put one foot in front of the other and breathe hard. And that was it. That was running. And I pulled my hamstring 3 times after back surgery. And then I finally got into running with proper form. Can you talk about, being a running coach and running with proper form, how much of a difference that makes in your recovery?
Well, that's the nice thing about the Ultra Gene. It forces you up and it forces you to run because it keeps you more control, like you mentioned. Um, but when you're running, for me, most of my coaching is with little kids. I do running coaching at my elementary school with a program called Running for Rat. And so just they either lean too far forward when they're running or they're standing almost backward when they're running. So you when you're teaching them stretches, you teach them different movements. It actually helps them with their form. A lot of the stretching that we do, it loosens up their hamstring because they don't, like you mentioned, you pulled your hamstring. So we have them do stretches. We have them do certain things to help loosen up their hips, their lower backs, their quads. So when they are running and they're running upright, it feels more natural.
So
So
you're on Instagram. I'm going to show the shot here of Davin Michael 77. Are you doing any online coaching at this time for anyone who's interested in getting a running coach?
No, I'm like I said, I actually go through Running for Ret, which is an organization here in
Okay.
Sacramento. It's nonprofit, and they do what they're about is getting kids active. So all mine is just getting the kids in my school active, getting them running. In fact, that the 5K I ran in December is their big one in December that they do, and they get I think like this year they have 77 schools participating.
Oh man.
So yeah, that's what it is. That's more my running coaches with 12 and under.
Well, still,
Basically,
those are the hardest ones to train. So
they are, but they're also the ones that are out there with me are also the ones that are most enthusiastic because it's getting them ready for their first 5K run. And most of them have barely only like either running football, baseball, basketball, and as you know, those are short distances. And some of
yes,
them have never ran before. So
well, that's good to
my
get
coaching
people
is with
moving.
them, and they seem the difference is they're hardest to coach, but they're also the most open minded. They're not going to argue with you because they're not going to say, "Well, this is the way I've always done it."
Yeah, you don't have to train their bad habits away.
Exactly.
And one thing I will mention, if you have a fusion or if you have back pain, especially after a fusion, though, you physically your anatomy is different than it was before. So working with someone, whether it be weightlifting, running, whatever the sport you're trying to get back into, working with a coach, it's probably going to be pretty beneficial because you may be doing it to where it feels the same way that it did before your
Yeah.
surgery, but it doesn't mean you're doing it the correct way.
Well, the funny thing is, if I do something wrong, I actually feel it where my fusion was. Those muscles still around that aren't the same. And if I do it wrong, it tells me.
So you're 14 months post fusion. What is your pain like right now? I know you talked about gabapentin.
The only pain I get is if I this weekend I need to do 17 to 18-mile run because I'm getting ready for a marathon in December. So the only pain I have is when I put it's that real ultra sensitivity in the back, my lower back. And so I'm gonna try something a little different that I haven't tried before. Is about an hour into my run, I'm gonna take 100 milligrams of gabapentin. I've done that on the bike. And like you said, because I take such low doses, it doesn't affect me. In order for it to really affect me, I have to take 300 milligrams at one moment, at one time. 100, it'll take that little bit of edge off. And so the hope is that if I do it at about, I don't know, miles 7 and maybe 14, that when I'm done with the 17 or 18 miles, when I sit down in my car, I don't go, because it hurts. That lower back is so sensitive that that was the reason why I was supposed to do an Ironman in May. That's the reason why I deferred. Because in March, when I did the 31-kilometer run, I sat down in that car and I was like, no, no. And I had to could I have done the Ironman in May? Probably. No doubt in my mind, I would have finished, but I wouldn't have been able to finish with the way I wanted to finish. It would have been most likely unpleasant, and it probably would have been sore for a couple days, just the
Yeah,
lower back itself.
and I know we had talked about doing what's called dry needling with a physical therapist.
Yeah.
It's like acupuncture mixed with a TENS unit, and it can really help with opening up nerve pathways if you have some nerve damage from surgery, or helping alleviate some of that pain by making some of those deep muscles release. So, are you still planning on completing an Ironman in the future?
Yeah, actually, like I said, I have a 20-mile run called like American River Parkway in 2 weeks. I have California International Marathon December 8th, May 9th, 10th, or 11th. I don't remember which the exact date is. I'm doing Ironman Santa Rosa 70.3, and then on July 25th, I'm doing the full Ironman in Santa Rosa.
So earlier, when you said that you backed out of the triathlon in May, you meant this May of 2019, not of
Yeah.
2020.
So I was signed up to do it, and the way IronMan sets it up, as long as you give them like 60 days before, they let you defer one time.
I'm over here doing math in my head. So that means you were like 7 months post-op at that time?
Yeah.
And people were telling you that you were crazy?
No, it's funny. For about 6 years, I've been teaching a different way. I've been teaching, it's called growth mindset. And that it basically comes down to, and I tell my students the same thing. If you work hard enough towards a goal, it might take some of you a little longer, but you will eventually get there. And I knew in my mind, as long as the biggest thing about growth mindset is staying positive. When this accident occurred, and no doctor ever told me I shouldn't return to my sport. They just said, be patient. I knew that in my mind, my original goal was to do this Ironman. I had paid for it. It was there. I knew the deferral process was there. So if I knew, that's why I did those runs in March and April. And that was that was my real big test. I had the swimming in, and the bike was easy. Not easy, but I had biked 100 miles on the trainer. And to do 100 miles on the trainer is about the most brutal thing you want to do. It was the running. Was I going to be able to get through the running predominantly pain-free? And when I got into that car and I went, no, I'm not going to feel good the next day. And I never feel good the day after an Ironman anyways, because it's 140 miles. But this would be a different not feeling good. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's a different kind of pain. I think anyone who runs that many miles is going to be in some kind of pain. Their back's probably going to bother them.
But this is a whole different type. It's the nerves.
Yes. And I know, have you heard that the 2-year mark is kind of the sweet spot for when the pain starts to really go away after a fusion?
Oh, no, I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, I was told it was the 2-year mark. Maurice talked about it was the 2-year mark. Kind of everything goes away. Now, I do want to mention there are 2 types of people who run Ironmans. I believe the cutoff to finish an Ironman is 17 hours. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So there's the kind of person like me who would say, okay, I'm going to run an Ironman in 16 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. And then there's the more competitive person like you. What kind of time are you trying to compete the Ironman in?
So my goal, I break it down differently. I want to do the swim, bike, and run in different times. The hope is that I get it in about 13. And that's another thing, and I'm sure this is my mindset. The person I compete against is myself. I don't look out there and I go, okay, you're my competition. I'm my number one competition now. I have literally, since this accident, taken my ego and I put it to the side. I know I won't be as fast or as strong as I once was, but that doesn't mean I can't compete at my level. And that's when I'm done with my competition, I'm done with my run for the day. Did I do the best that I could have done? Did I leave something out there that I should have put into my race? And that's what it comes down to for me now. It's not about trying to qualify for Kona. It's not about trying to qualify for Boston for a marathon. It's about when it's all said and done, did I do the best that I could possibly have done on that day?
Yeah, and then you mentioned you're competing with yourself, which was the same with me in my powerlifting, and it still is. But do people have a perception, at least when you first got hurt, and then now that you've had a spinal fusion,
Mm-hmm.
you don't look any different. You don't have a physical cast. I mean, you may have a brace for a little bit, but people kind of have a perception of if you're doing something slower than they think that you should, that kind of what's wrong with you, why are you dragging, and you kind of have to deal with that. You have, I wouldn't say a disability. That's not how I classify mine. I just kind of I guess kind of a little bit of a handicap that people can't see.
Well, and that's why when I'm out there and I see somebody that I'm passing that looks more physically fit, that's the biggest difference now is I'm like not judging them. Why aren't they going faster? Because I don't know what's going on here and I don't know what's going on in other parts of their body. So I think that's another big difference for me is I stopped looking at someone and going, because one of the triathlons I did, one of the Ironman events I did, somebody said, "You look like a Kona qualifier," and I'm like, "What does a Kona qualifier look like?" Well, you have that body, and I'm like, what? To me, it's like this perception that I'm about 5'10", I weigh 155, that I should be fast, and I'm like, nah, I've never been fast in my life. Whereas I have a friend who is about 6 foot, but weighs about 210, and he runs a 7:30 mile, and that's over about a course of a half marathon.
Oh my goodness. Yes, he's definitely fast.
So, and I'm thinking, and he's like, "I'm fat," and I'm like, "Dude, it doesn't matter. You still run so fast."
Yes.
So size, looking at somebody and just perceiving that they should be a certain way, that's where I've stopped doing it. And I used to do it. I'm not gonna lie. That used to be me out there as I pass people. Why aren't they going faster?
Mhm.
They look like they should.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is no look. There is no look anymore.
Yeah. I remember I was warming up to do the my squat opener, and there were 2 plates on the bar, and I
Mhm.
was in the fatter person division of the USPA powerlifting. And after 2 plates, they were like, "What? You're done?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm done. I'm not squatting any more than that." So I will talk briefly about my experience in the sprint triathlon. It was at it was Mexico Beach, the Baja Blast, which
Okay.
it's in Florida, which was devastated by the hurricane. All that's gone now. Kind of weird to think about that. But you know how triathlons work, where there was the Olympic and the sprint. I
Yeah.
was doing the sprint. So there was a 6-minute time difference between when I started swimming and when the women's division started swimming.
Okay.
And
For the
I,
sprint or for the
for
Olympic?
this, well, both. They let the Olympic men go first,
Okay.
then 3 minutes, then the sprint men, then 3 minutes, the Olympic women, and then another 3 minutes, and the sprint women. And I was the last one out of the water with the slowest recorded swim time, I think, in Mexico Beach Blast history. But I finished it, so I was happy
Yeah.
that I finished my little swim. Um, so I've kind of delving into a little bit to the triathlon, which is why I saw your Instagram and I thought this guy would be great to have on the podcast, especially since he's had a fusion. Do you have any? Do you dabble in weightlifting at all since your fusion, or do you stay
Yeah, I
away from
do,
it?
and I should have mentioned it. I was actually back. The reason why I got into triathlons is my life was going to the gym 6 days a week, around 3:30 in the morning. I mean, I used to go to the gym at 3:30 in the morning because I like to get it over
Yeah.
with. So one day I'm like, I pretty much I'm bored, and that's why I got into triathlons. Um, so actually even before I got back on the bike, at about week 3, maybe actually about the same time I got back on the bike, I made it to the gym doing just the minimal amount of weight. Literally, I'd get on and I was using only machines. So whatever the smallest weight was, it was all about making sure that I kept the form, keeping it, and it was just building. I lost 9 pounds in the short time I was in the hospital. They wouldn't let me eat for 2.5 days. They gave me an IV for 2.5 days because they didn't know when my surgery would be.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So imagine I was only 155 pounds going in. I lost 9 of those pounds, and it wasn't fat. They didn't take off the fat. It
No,
was
yeah, you lose
muscle mass.
muscles so quick. I was 210 the day before surgery. I tried to put off the surgery as long as I could, and I kept losing muscle mass because I couldn't work out like I
Yeah,
should have. But after 6 weeks of not doing anything but sitting on the couch, I was down to like 175.
yeah,
It
and so
goes
you,
quick.
my
And I was
goal
just
when I,
fat. All that
yeah,
stayed was fat.
yeah, and yeah, so you have that muscle. I could, my shoulders just felt like I was an old man. You could physically see it in me. So my goal was just to pick up a 2.5 pound dumbbell. I knew that would start to build that muscle, get that muscle memory back. So yeah, I was going to the gym 2 or 3 days a week, and like I said, just the lightest weights I could do. Wasn't even breaking a sweat, but yeah, that was pretty important for me too.
So one thing I noticed in your Instagram, you're smiling in like every picture, and you seem to have a really positive outlook, even with at 41 breaking your back. That's not something that was in the life plan. How do you stay so positive?
It could have been worse.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
I'm getting a little verklempt here, but honestly, I've seen people hit poles like that and they die. And the fact that I literally walked away from that accident with one vertebrae fractured and nobody was in the car with me. That was my biggest thing. I didn't have any passengers. My wife and daughter went with me or weren't with me. The fact that I had one vertebrae fracture and that was it. And the ambulance was there within like 5 minutes. And did it hurt to get on that board? Oh God, did it hurt? Did every little bump in the road hurt on the way to the hospital? I felt it through every muscle fiber in my body. For the first 4 hours in the hospital, they didn't give me any medication. And they moved me around so much. And I was like, I mean, there were times I was saying words that I'm glad my daughter didn't come see me till the next day. Um, they said, "How much pain are you in?" I said, "Are you effing kidding me?"
Yeah,
Okay, they're like, "Okay, okay." When they finally gave me some fentanyl through my IV, I was like, I mean, that thing only lasted like 45 minutes.
yeah, it has a short
Fentanyl
half
is like,
life, and I'm sure you still felt pain, just not as severe.
it went from, they always say, "What's your scale from 1 to 10?" I always told them I was 15. It went from 15 down to 5 in a
Yeah,
matter of seconds.
but that's just crazy how bad a broken vertebrae can hurt.
Yeah.
Um, with
I mean, I couldn't
fentanyl, takes it to a 5.
there was a test, and I don't even know what the test was and why, but the doctor needed me to clench my butt cheeks. I
Hmm.
couldn't even do that.
That
That's
is
how much pain.
no. Well, I don't know if it was a pain. I don't know what they were trying to test. Maybe your nerve conductivity. But one of the biggest problems that I have had and still deal with is my glutes firing. So still an
Mm,
issue. Still working with it. Um, I really appreciate you coming on and giving your perspective. I'm going to open it up for a free for all here in a second. But for everyone watching and who is going to watch, we are all rooting for you in
oh,
your
thank you.
upcoming Ironman. And I would love to have you back on when you finish,
Yeah.
or fly out there and cheer you on during the Kona in case you
Oh
qualify, which I'm sure you will.
no, see, and
We
that's the
have
thing.
faith. We have faith in you.
The problem with my division, it's the second largest division in all of the age groups. The only one that's larger is the one below me, 35 to 39.
So what you could do, Gavin, is come up to the Clydesdale division.
They don't have that in Ironman.
They don't. That's because then you'd be
Yeah.
one of 3 people competing like I was, and just win by
If I'm
default.
still competing at 70, I'll qualify because there's like one person at 70 in every race.
But what's more important to think about is how many people out there doing any type of Ironman, which Ironmans have really grown in popularity over the last
Yeah.
couple of years. So the competitor, it's a lot more competitive than it used to be. You're probably of the 0.001% who are doing it with a spinal fusion.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's gonna be the swim. The nice thing about the swim is I don't care what the water temperature is. Santa Rosa in July may or may not be wetsuit legal, which just means that if I wear a wetsuit, I can't podium. I can't finish in the top 5. It wasn't gonna happen. Um, it's keeping my hips afloat to take the stress off the lower back.
Yeah. So actually, when I did my swim, I didn't use my legs. I just floated on my back and did the
Oh
breaststroke
my
the whole way
gosh.
because my legs would cramp up so bad. But one of the things I want to hit on is for anyone who's watching this who's made it here toward the end is that if you've had a fusion, um, any physical activity that you can get into is good. You don't have to be competitive. You don't have to run an Ironman. You don't have to lift as much weight as you possibly can. But staying on the couch and being inactive, which is what a lot of the information out there tells you have to do, is not
Oh,
optimal for you. It's just going to get worse. Your pain is going to get worse the less that you move.
um, I went back to work 3 weeks after my fusion. Now,
Same.
I'm an elementary school teacher, so I can get up and move around as much or as little as I wanted, for the most part. My principal looked at when I called her, I said, "I'm coming back." She goes, "Are you sure?" And I said, "If I don't come back, I'm going to go crazy." The doctors basically said the same thing. They needed a medical release for me to go. But yeah, I needed to move, and I didn't care if it was walking. I made little goals for myself. I started at 1,000 steps a day, then I upped it to 1,200 steps a day, and by the time I was going back to work, I was hitting 4 or 5,000 steps a day, and that was the big thing for me. It's creating small goals for yourself to accomplish, and when you accomplish that, up the goal a little bit, and it doesn't matter. It can be the little things.
Agreed. Yeah. If you set an unrealistic goal and then
Yeah.
you try to hit it, and then after 2 weeks, your progress is so slow, you'll just quit. So it's important to be incremental. And then I just thought of something. You were laying in the hospital for 2 days. Did you know that you would have to have a spinal fusion at
Yeah,
day
because
1 or 2?
um the first 12 hours I was in like the actual ER. Then they moved me to like a side part of the ER. By then, I think about 24 hours after being in the hospital, the actual surgeon came up and basically said, he showed me the X-ray or MRI. I'm not even exactly sure which one it was, and said, he goes, I highly recommend spinal fusion. I literally just went, okay, let's do it. Book me up, get me in as soon as possible. I mean,
Did you?
I didn't argue with it. There's no
Yeah.
reason to.
After you knew you'd have to have a fusion, did you just pull out your phone and start like Googling spinal fusion and going on YouTube?
Actually, the good part is my brother is an ER doctor,
Mhm.
and he was in constant contact with my mom. Before they found out that the internal bleeding wasn't what they thought it was, he was about ready to call the doctors because he had worked at UC Davis for a little bit. So I'm not sure if he knew some of the doctors but he was about ready to find out what they were about to do with it, making sure that they were, because he's an ER doctor in Florida. So he had already texted me and said, "This is what your expectations are. I've talked to the doctors here. These are what the things." So I didn't even have to Google it.
That's awesome. So I'm just gonna open it up. Whatever you want to talk about, anything you want to mention here on the podcast before we get it over with.
Like I said, you had mentioned that I'm smiling in my pictures just because I think that the fact that I still get to do this, I went back to the lifestyle I had before, is the reason why I can't complain. I can't complain that I'm slower. I can't complain that these are things that I knew as age would progressively slow down, but the fact that I'm still doing it is why I'm so happy. And it comes down to, if I can just encourage that one person to make an effort to get off the couch, to start walking the block or do something and not just sit around and I felt sorry for myself. And I knew that would happen. But then I realized I still have feeling in my toes. I still have feeling in my fingers. I can, excuse me, I can bend over. I can do all those things. I can't complain anymore. There's nothing in this world that I'm allowed to complain about, that I want to complain about, because the fact that I have more days in my life when that pull could have ended it all.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff, and I know what you're saying. We hit a slump, and it could be worse. If you guys follow me on Instagram, I fix wheelchairs for a living. So a lot of people
Yeah.
that were in your situation are not as lucky. They may not have died, but some of them, you break your back. Most of the time, you have a spinal cord injury and you can't walk anymore. So you are blessed.
One of the things I saw shortly after my accident, I found it. It was a YouTube video put out by Goldcast, and her name is Janine Shepherd, and she's an Australian Olympic athlete who days before going to the Olympics got into a horrible bike accident and was in the hospital for I don't even know how long, and she was told she would never walk again. And now I think it was like I don't even remember how it went, but basically she's walking on her own now. And it was because she didn't listen to people. She knew what her body was capable of. She knew what her mind could overcome. And that the human spirit is definitely more powerful than people give it credit to be.
No, I agree 100%. Well, Gavin, I really appreciate you coming on. It's been really good to hear from a perspective of a triathlete, which to me, I just want to put this out there because I've done both. Triathlon is way harder than powerlifting. I'll say that 100
They're
times more than
different,
not.
and that's the thing.
They are different.
Hard hard.
Powerlifting, it's a bunch of fat guys. You lift a barbell really slowly, and the most exciting things that can happen is someone throws up or someone pees on themselves, And then running, it's more fun to watch. I'll watch Olympic triathlon all day. Powerlifting is just boring. But I do appreciate you coming on. It's been really good talking to you. And for anybody out there watching, if you're interested, if you've had a spinal fusion and you want to come on the podcast, find me on Instagram at rdog422 or just comment below and we'll get it when the emails. And with that, Michael, thank you. And it's really good to talk to you.
All right. Have a good night. Take it easy.